Hi, Tom. Hi, Suella.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Suella. My question for you is, with the meteoric rise in popularity of Reform UK, what are your views on the idea of a coalition between the Conservatives and Reform? And also, does Reform's values fit or align more closely with your own personal political values and beliefs?
All right, gosh. Listen.
Let's see if we can get you off message today.
I've been warning for some time about the severe threat that the Conservative Party faces at the moment. And, we have been hurt by the Reform Party because their success has been, as you say, meteoric in a very short space of time. And much of our defeat was because of Reform. I've lost count of the number of my colleagues who lost their seats in July because they were reformed effectively. This is our fault. The Conservative Party failed to tackle immigration. We failed to cut taxes, and we failed to stand up for common sense, patriotic values. And it's our fault that Reform has risen so exponentially. In terms of going forward, if you look at the polling, look at this last poll that came out yesterday. If you take the collective vote share of the Conservatives and Reform, we're approaching 50% of the vote. I think it would come up to 47% or something like that. You can't win an election outright on 25%. And ultimately, I'm someone who really does think that we should do whatever it takes to stop another Labour administration. And if there is territory for agreement and coalition, I don't know what you call it or what form it takes, and these discussions will crystallise nearer the election. I do think that if there is alignment between the Conservatives and the Reform Party at the time of the next election, if it means stopping another 5 years of Labour, I would support it.
And that could mean Reform stands a candidate in one particular seat where they're most likely to win, and the Conservatives drop that particular candidate and stand it in different areas, similar to what Nigel Farage did for Boris Johnson in 2019. There
are many forms in which it could take. So there's either some kind of agreement before an election, in the form that you suggest, standing down candidates, or there is some form of agreement after an election. It all depends on how people vote.
Coalition.
That's one way.
Confidence and supply.
Confidence and supply is
like
another.
The DUP.
Like the DUP, that's another arrangement. So there are lots of forms, and it's too premature to try and preempt what form it might take. But I do think, at some point, a serious conversation needs to be had, because I am horrified by what this government has done in 6 months. Imagine what they're going to do in 5 years.
How can it ever be prudent for a British government to allow Chinese companies and Chinese students access to UK national infrastructure?
Great question. Thank you very much for asking this. And I think that there has been a level of complacency amongst governments of all stripes over recent decades to take the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party seriously. China poses a threat to the United Kingdom's national security. And the sooner that we face up to that truth and stop kowtowing to them, the better our levels of security will be in this country. Universities, you mentioned. There is a campaign by several universities in China called the Seven Sons Universities, which are linked to the Chinese Communist Party and are part of a campaign of espionage. Not every single Chinese student in the UK is a spy. But there is evidence that we have seen now of the Chinese Communist Party using the student visa route and university places in UK universities as a way to exert influence, harass those who are dissidents, and try and exert undue influence on our operations. Similarly with businesses, we've seen instances where there are hostile takeovers by entities linked to the Chinese Communist Party of companies, manufacturers, private companies in the UK, which are strategically important for our critical national infrastructure. When I was Home Secretary, we blocked one of those takeovers relating to a company called Newport Wafer Fab, a semiconductor manufacturer, because there was a national security risk. So you're absolutely right to alight on this issue, and I'm afraid this Labour government is, very naive when it comes to the threat posed by China.
You would say that, wouldn't you? There have been, multiple Conservative governments, David Cameron's notably, who have sought money from China. Xi Jinping was, I think, invited to a pub near Chequers. I think it ended up being that a Chinese company bought that pub. So this has happened under Conservative governments. You say in a tweet, quote, "I saw firsthand the danger the CCP poses, and this economic appeasement is a reckless gamble." Describe that danger. You're saying that there are Chinese spies posing as students.
Yes, well, countless examples, which are very much in the public domain. So Chinese police stations. I was dealing with Chinese police stations when I was Home Secretary, so a bit of a phenomenon grew up whereby the Chinese state was effectively running their own form of law enforcement on UK territory. So informal, but very robust and sometimes quite aggressive, that, agents on behalf of the Chinese state operating in the UK, on UK territory, intimidating, harassing, and being very threatening, and sometimes, some cases, violent towards known dissidents or Hong Kong, citizens who are challenging the Chinese government. No, absolutely, and we took very robust action, and we largely shut them down.
You can't ignore China. They're the economic powerhouse of the world. Everything is geopolitically moving east.
Yeah, we can't ignore them, obviously, because they are an economic power. But at the same time, I think we need to be very clear-eyed. What comes first? To my mind, our national security comes first.
The question I think that people want answering, and I want answering, is why weren't all those 20 recommendations implemented? Because the report took 7 years. What was the time scale? How long did you have to implement those recommendations?
So we accepted them. Jay reported in the autumn of 2022. I accepted the recommendations. We set up the Grooming Gangs Task Force in 2023, and we needed to get the law right, so we prepared the bill. The Criminal Justice Bill was prepared in the second half of 2023. That's writing a quite large piece of legislation. I was involved heavily in drafting that piece of legislation. You have to get the law right. And as I said, we were cut short. The early general election prevented that from being implemented. I know it's not much consolation, but it's an explanation for why.
Or rather, you were exited from your post before the general election.
I left the post as well before we completed the work. But regardless of that, it was still in the bill. So even when I left the post,
all 20 recommendations, you were, as Home Secretary, determined to implement all of them, right?
We had chosen, some of them required primary legislation, not all of them. So the ones that required primary legislation, notably this duty to report, was included in the Criminal Justice Bill. I have to say, we had to make the case against some resistance from some other departments. Not everybody in government had signed up to it wholesale because there were concerns about over-regulating and imposing more burdens on youth groups and those working with young people. So we had to make the case repeatedly and over some time that child welfare and child safety on the back of the grooming gangs and child sexual exploitation was of paramount importance. So we had to make the argument, you have to get the policy through, and then you include it in a bill. And then the bill, as I said, the early general election cut short the time that bill had for scrutiny in Parliament. And that's why it didn't become a law. The intention was there, and we took the steps that were available in the time that we had. But yes, we didn't make it over the finishing line.
In regard to the investigations about the abuse going on, the same again. You were in power for 14 years and you didn't put that further investigation into power, but you're jumping up and down now out of power. You talk about the Chinese. Again, your government was in power for 14 years, setting up that communication of economic activity, and now you're saying it shouldn't be done. And then you talk about your best friend, Nigel Farage. If you wanted a coalition between them, would you have him as the Prime Minister?
Wow, lots of questions, keeping me busy. OK. David, I take your point. Listen, we failed on many, many things. So I am not going. I'm on record like I'm a broken record on talking about how we failed on several key aspects when we were in government. However, I do think we've got to, whilst accepting that, also accept that we did make some progress, and that that doesn't stop me from criticising what this government is doing. So on grooming gangs, as I said, I set up a task force. It led to over 500 arrests and it safeguarded 4,000 victims. I'm proud of that. Could we have done more? Yes, of course. But we did do
there is some
important work.
Jumping here.
We did important work which led to tangible outcomes.
But there is some bandwagon jumping. It's not. I'm not.
Not far right bandwagon.
I didn't use that phrase.
Good.
But you are jumping on a bandwagon, which is hold another inquiry.
Well, listen, I'm not jumping on the bandwagon because I've raised this as Home Secretary, and I've got a track record of when I was Home Secretary.
When did you raise the idea of another inquiry as Home Secretary?
No, I'm not talking about inquiry. I'm talking about the issue as it's. I put my head above the parapet again with the Prime Minister. Went to Rochdale, Rotherham, met the victims. I didn't have to do that. I did that as Home Secretary when I had the opportunity to do so. This is not a bandwagon for me. This is one of the biggest scandals that our country has ever seen, and it needs to be fixed. What I do think we should be talking about, as I said, the inquiry is important. It's not going to solve the problem. We need to be looking at what is happening on the front line of operational policing. So we need to be asking ourselves, how many dedicated and specialist police officers have the relevant police forces diverted to these cases? How many live investigations have they got ongoing now? How long is it taking from arrest to charge, from charge to trial? I bet it's taking years. Why isn't the government taking action to galvanise the criminal justice system, just as we saw the Prime Minister do in the summer in relation to the riots, to galvanise the criminal justice system, the judiciary, the prosecution service and the police, to fast-track some of these cases? That's something that Keir Starmer could do tomorrow. He's choosing not to do that. To me, that is a gross failing of the victims and everyone who suffered from this scandal.
The answer back would be because your lot broke it.
Not
you
at
broke
all.
The criminal justice system.
I do refute that. Listen, Keir Starmer could bring all the arms of the criminal justice system together today, and he could instruct a fast tracking of these cases. We could see some of these trials get to court, convictions, sentencing. We could actually secure real justice in quite a short space of time. We saw in the summer how people who were breaking the law on the Saturday were in court on the Monday and literally receiving their sentence on the Tuesday. The Prime Minister, together with the criminal justice system, could expedite the system if they really wanted to. The fact that he's not doing it speaks volumes.
You could have done too.
Well, as I said, I set up a task force that led to 500 arrests. That safeguarded 4,000 victims. So as I said, I am proud of those tangible outcomes that wouldn't have happened had it not been for the commitment that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and myself demonstrated at the time. Could we have done more? We could have always have done more. But so I'm not going to stand here and say, well, because we didn't perfectly fix the problem, I cannot criticise this government today. We've got to move on from the last 10 years. Labour's in charge now. They've got the levers at their disposal to make a change. They're failing or refusing to use those levers, and that speaks volumes.
Dave, thank you. And to his question about Nigel Farage as Prime Minister, your friend, you'd work for Nigel Farage as PM?
Listen, I'm a Conservative Member of Parliament, member of the Conservative Party. I'm working for a Conservative victory and Conservative Prime Minister.
Or a coalition with Reform or some sort of dealing,
as I said,
at the election.
And I am willing for us to do whatever it takes to stop another Labour administration.
Shazad is in Wimbledon. Shazad.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
Yeah, my question is with Suella, so with the Conservative Party, but keeps bashing the Conservatives. I would like to know when in the near future is she planning to move to Reform? And also, I have a lot of vacation in 2025, and I quote, in James O'Brien's show, she said they built a wall. I went to see that wall. They built a wall on the land border between Italy and Turkey. I would love to see that wall, Suella. So, yeah, enlighten me, please.
Thanks, Shazad, for your question. I'm not defecting to Reform. As I said, I've been a Conservative Party member since I was 14. I think that makes me pretty cool. Everyone here is gonna say that makes me uncool. I'm gonna challenge that. Okay. I think it's pretty cool. Listen, I'm working for a Conservative victory, and I'm supporting Conservative members of Parliament. I just want the best for my country, and this Labour government is ruining our country economically, from a security point of view, from a law and order point of view, and they are a shambles. And I just don't want us to see a decade of them in power. In terms of Turkey and Greece, you are right. I meant Greece. Listen, I have been to the Greek.
Did you do geography
Turkey.
At university?
I did. Not at university.
Right,
not at
school.
university.
Right,
no,
fine.
I did. I think GCSE geography perhaps. But I went to the Greek-Turkey border. I met with the Greek authorities, and I was very impressed with the robust border security that they had delivered. They built a wall. They built a wall on the Greek-Turkey land border, and as a result, they're probably the only European country, or one of the only European countries, which has actually succeeded in dramatically reducing their inflow of illegal migration. They're a great case study to look to.
Good afternoon, Suella. I just wanted to know, if you got back into government, would you seek to put further restrictions on trade unions? Like, for example, would you say they would have to give a month's notice before they could call a strike?
Well, personally, I do think that we do need to consider how our public services are better delivered. And to my mind, in this country, some of our trade unions, kind of hold the government to ransom, particularly when it's a Labour government. We've seen recently, huge paid settlements agreed with trade unions, militant and demanding trade unions, only for more strikes to thereafter be announced. So the government's not very good at negotiating with trade unions. The trade unions wield a disproportionate level of power at the moment. They are affecting hard-working Britons because trains aren't running.
Well, they want them to sort it out.
And
I
our
can't get a damn
NHS
train in from Kent when the trains go on strike, or the ASLEF drive. It's absolutely crippling. I want the government to sort it out. If they're going to have to be paid, they're going to have to be paid.
Well, not necessarily, no. I don't think trade unions can demand any price whatsoever, because public sector spending is an important consideration, and keeping inflation down is an important consideration. And ultimately, the government can't be dictated to by the demands of a handful of militant trade union leaders in the country. That's not how democratic politics works, at least under a Conservative government. And that's why, and I think measures to further limit the ability of trade unions to hold a government to ransom, but more importantly, disrupt the lives of the law-abiding, hard-working majority, should be considered.
Okay. Tony, thank you for your question. Question here from Claire. Why did you call asylum seekers invaders or an invasion?
Listen, I think that the numbers of people coming on the boats across the Channel have been a disgrace. And over the last few years, those numbers have, been in their tens of thousands. I think we're almost at about over 100,000 in total now, and we've got tens of thousands of people breaking into our country without permission. They're not all asylum seekers. Many of them are making the journey out of choice. Many of them are paying for the journey, and many of them are doing it to jump the queue to get into our country to work illegally.
You described them all as an invasion.
Well, they don't have
to what
permission.
End?
Those people don't have permission to come into the country. And technically that is the right terminology. So I think that we have to be honest about what's happening. We have too many people coming into our country in a way that is illegal and unfair on the vast majority of people. And it's all being funded by the British taxpayer.
We
are not in
right
control of our borders.
People have a legal right to claim asylum. What is the way in which an Eritrean bloke can claim asylum in the UK?
They can. There are UN agencies all around the world which facilitate the claiming of asylum from abroad, and that's how people who are seeking to come to this country should make their applications. So,
if a person comes here and claims asylum by getting to Britain and claiming it, that is their legal right.
Well,
or is that an invasion?
They should have a visa to come to the country in the first place.
From
so
who?
How? They can apply for asylum from abroad through the UN agencies, and that is, there are hundreds of thousands of people around the world who are displaced for whatever reason, who are fleeing persecution, who are in turmoil, and they use the UN route to apply for asylum to the UK, and that's how we can get a chance to have some control over the system. Having a free-for-all whereby our borders are wholly insecure and we don't have any idea who's coming into the country and we can't track them and they don't have the right to come into this country is not an acceptable situation.
People would agree with you. Lots of people would agree with you. Why use the term invasion? An invasion invokes an army that... What are they invading to do?
Well, people are coming into this country in very high numbers without the permission to do so. We can quibble about terminology. The fact
you
is,
used the word. I'm asking you why you used the word.
Over a year, like 2 years ago. I mean, we're really, going back in history here. But let's look at what's happening now. We've got. I'm afraid the numbers are rising under Labour faster than they were under the Conservatives. The Labour Party scrapped the only deterrent that had a glimmer of a chance of fixing the problem, i.e. our Rwanda scheme. And I have very little confidence that this government is going to fix the problem.